In the remote highlands of eastern Kentucky's Cumberland Plateau, where the ridges fold into one another like the backs of sleeping giants, lies a valley long erased from maps. Locals once called it Iron Hollow, a name spoken with unease, as though saying it aloud might summon the ghosts that linger there. In the winter of 1895, three brothers, Jedediah, Obadiah, and Malachi Shepherd, made a decision that would poison their bloodline for generations to come. It was there, within that bowl of rock and forest, that they sealed what they called the Forbidden Pact, a covenant so vile it would echo down through the years as one of Appalachia's darkest tales. The hollow was unlike any other place in the Cumberland Range. Sheer limestone cliffs encircled it on every side, rising 300 feet from the valley floor, leaving only a single narrow gap to pass through. The stream that ran through its center never froze, even when the ridges above lay buried under 6 feet of snow. Hunters said the deer that entered its depths never came back out. Travelers described a silence so deep that the forest seemed to swallow sound whole. Those who stumbled upon it by accident left quickly and did not return. The land itself seemed to reject intrusion, as if guarding the secrets buried within. The Shepherd family had come here decades earlier under the leadership of Ezekiel Shepherd, a preacher cast out from his congregation for doctrines too radical even for the wild faiths of the frontier. Ezekiel claimed the outside world had fallen to corruption, that commerce, blood mixing, and the influence of outsiders had doomed mankind. Only through isolation and purity of blood, he taught, could salvation be kept. When he led his wife and children into Iron Hollow in the 1870s, he declared it their promised land, a fortress against contamination. In that lonely valley, Ezekiel's beliefs took root like fungus on rotting wood. His children grew up without schooling, neighbors, or any contact with civilization. They were taught that outsiders carried disease of the soul, that law and government were instruments of the fallen world, and that their own lineage was chosen by God to remain untouched. When Ezekiel died in 1894, his son Josiah Shepherd continued the doctrine, marrying his own cousin to preserve the sacred seed. The following year, Josiah's wife bore him triplets, Jedediah, Obadiah, and Malachi. Ezekiel's surviving followers, few as they were, called it a miracle. Josiah called it proof of divine favor. To the brothers themselves, it meant something darker, that they were bound to each other not only by blood, but by destiny. By the turn of the century, Iron Hollow had become a closed world. The triplets, tall and silent, had never seen a town, never met a stranger, and never once questioned the creed carved into them by generations of madness. When Josiah died, the brothers stood over his grave and swore before the cold wind that they would uphold the law of their forefathers. And so, under the shadow of the cliffs, they kept their promise, a promise that would soon rot into horror. By the winter of 1895, Iron Hollow had become both kingdom and prison to the Shepherds. The triplets, Jedediah, Obadiah, and Malachi, were 20 years old, strong as draft horses, their faces so alike that strangers might have taken them for reflections of one another. They had grown beneath the stern gaze of their father Josiah, who ruled the family according to the commandments written by his father before him, Ezekiel's doctrine of purity. That doctrine, copied in fading ink onto the pages of a handmade Bible, proclaimed that the outside world was infected by sin, and that true salvation could only be kept through the preservation of the chosen blood. Ezekiel's words, half scripture and half madness, warned that mingling with outsiders would bring eternal damnation upon the family. Josiah enforced it as divine law. The boys were forbidden from speaking to travelers or venturing beyond the cliffs. Their mother, Abigail Shepherd, taught them the basics of reading only from the family Bible. She feared her husband as much as she worshipped him, and the sound of his boots on the cabin floor was enough to silence every voice in the house. Their lives followed a brutal rhythm. In the mornings, they hunted deer in the high woods or trapped fox and mink for trade. In the evenings, Josiah led them in prayer, his voice rising over the crackle of the hearth as he recited verses twisted to suit his gospel. When storms howled through the hollow, he would speak of the cleansing flood of Noah's obedience, and of the chosen seed that must remain untainted while the world drowned in corruption. By the time the brothers reached manhood, they had never seen another family. To them, Josiah's words were not teachings but truth. They believed that beyond the cliffs lay a dying world, ruled by temptation and sickness. And when Josiah's health began to fail, he passed to his sons a final commandment, the one that would shape the horror to come. He told them that the world would soon end, and that they must continue the sacred bloodline by any means necessary. The women of their kin, he said, were the vessels chosen by God. To mix their blood with outsiders would be to defy creation itself. Josiah died in the autumn of 1894, buried in the stony ground behind the cabin he had built with his own hands. His sons stood at his grave beneath a gray sky, their breath fogging in the cold, and swore upon the open Bible that they would obey his dying words. Their mother Abigail wept, not for her husband, but for the unholy vow she knew her sons had taken. A year later, the brothers gathered their surviving kin, an aunt named Patience, a cousin named Eliza, and their aging mother, and before a crude wooden altar, they performed their own wedding rites. What began that night was not love, but legacy. In the flickering lamplight, beneath the watch of their mother's hollow eyes, the Shepherd brothers sealed their lineage into a closed circle of flesh and faith. The forbidden pact was complete, and Iron Hollow, once merely a place of isolation, became a crucible of sin that would fester for decades in silence. Years bled together in Iron Hollow, marked not by seasons but by births and burials. Snow would come and go, floods would rise and vanish, and still the shepherds remained sealed within their fortress of cliffs and scripture. By 1900, the Forbidden Pact had already begun to bear its terrible fruit. From the unholy unions came children, many of them sickly, some born dead, others surviving only a few winters before succumbing to the cruel deficiencies of their blood. The brothers saw these deaths not as tragedy but as divine trial. In their twisted creed, the weak perished because God had judged them unworthy to carry the sacred seed. Those who lived bore the marks of generations folded in upon themselves. Some were born with eyes too far apart, or limbs slightly twisted, or minds that never fully woke. Yet among them were a few who appeared whole, children like Elizabeth Shepherd, the daughter of Eliza and her brother Jedediah. She was born under a full moon in 1902, her cry echoing against the valley walls like a sound the earth itself tried to swallow. To the brothers, Elizabeth's birth was an omen of blessing. To the women, it was a reminder of chains they could never escape. Matilda, their aging mother and now matriarch of the clan, ruled over them with a faith so hard it might have been carved from stone. She quoted Ezekiel's gospel daily, reminding the women that their bodies were not their own, but belonged to the bloodline. Her word was law, and behind her thin lips lived a conviction that had long outgrown sanity. The hollow itself seemed to bend around the shepherd's madness. No outsiders came anymore. No hunters dared to cross the limestone gate. The family grew more secretive, building a second cabin deeper in the woods, one for the lesser wives and their children, as Matilda called them. It was there that Eliza and Patience lived, their days filled with endless toil, tending fires, preserving food, and burying the infants who never saw their first spring. The children were raised in fear as much as faith. They learned that disobedience invited the devil's whisper, and that the cliffs surrounding Iron Hollow were the walls of Eden itself. Beyond them lay damnation. None dared to question it, none except Elizabeth. Even as a small girl, she would stare toward the gap in the cliffs, the only break in the valley's stone crown, and wonder what lay beyond it. She asked questions that brought slaps from her mother and silence from the brothers. But curiosity is a flame that cannot easily be smothered. By the time Elizabeth turned 10, the whispers of the forest had become voices in her mind, calling her toward freedom she could not name. Still, life inside the hollow followed its cruel rhythm. The triplets grew older, their beards streaked with gray, their faith hardened to iron. The women grew thinner, their eyes duller. Each year more graves appeared in the soft earth behind the second cabin, small mounds marked only by stones. By 1915, no one outside Iron Hollow even remembered the shepherds existed. Their names had faded into mountain folklore, ghost tales told by firelight. But the sins of the hollow were not buried as deeply as its keepers believed, for among the dying children was one who would live, and one day. The winter of 1917 came early to Iron Hollow. Frost clung to the branches before the first snow fell, and the creek that wound through the valley turned to glass beneath the December moon. That same winter, Elizabeth Shepherd turned 15, and the triplets decided she was old enough to become what they called a vessel of renewal. The ceremony was set for the night of the winter solstice, when the old blood was to be made pure again. Matilda oversaw the preparations, her voice dry as parchment as she recited Ezekiel's gospel by lamplight. To her, this was not evil, not crime, it was duty. But to Elizabeth, it was the sound of damnation itself. In the weeks before the ceremony, Elizabeth began to plan what no shepherd had ever dared: escape. She'd overheard her Aunt Patience whisper of a trail once used by trappers long ago, a narrow path that snaked through the cliffs on the north ridge. It was said to be cursed. Men who entered never returned. To Elizabeth, that sounded less like a curse and more like freedom. Every night, after the others slept, she gathered what she could steal without notice: flint, a strip of dried venison, a small knife her cousin Elias had dropped years before. She hid them beneath a loose plank in the cabin floor, and she waited. The solstice came. The brothers wore their father's coats and carried torches to the altar cabin. Matilda followed, her Bible clutched to her chest. The women knelt in silence while the wind hissed through the cracks of the walls. Elizabeth's heart hammered like a trapped bird. She knew if she did not flee that night, she never would. When the chants began, she slipped from the back of the cabin, her bare feet crunching over frost. The torchlight behind her flickered through the pines as she crept toward the north ridge. Each step was agony. Every sound seemed to echo through the stillness of the hollow. Behind her came a shout. Someone had seen her. A man's voice, Jedediah's, cut through the trees, calling her name not as father, but as owner. She ran. Branches tore her dress, ice bit her skin, and the forest seemed to rise up to stop her. But ahead she saw it. The narrow cleft between the cliffs, half choked with snow and roots. She squeezed through, scraping her arms bloody on the limestone. On the other side lay a slope leading down into a frozen ravine. She slipped, tumbled, and landed hard on the stones below, but she was beyond the hollow. For the first time, she could see the stars without the cliffs hemming them in. She walked through the night, half delirious from cold, until she reached a logging road at dawn. There she collapsed. A wagon driver found her 2 days later, starved, frostbitten, and barely able to speak. When she awoke in a church infirmary miles away, she gave a name no one recognized: Elizabeth Shepherd, of Iron Hollow. But the preacher who nursed her back to health had lived long enough in the Ozarks to know that name. He sent word to the sheriff. And when the first lawman rode into Iron Hollow that spring, what they found there would haunt Missouri for 100 years. When Sheriff Amos Kettering and his men rode into Iron Hollow in the spring of 1918, they expected to find a backwoods farm, maybe a clan of moonshiners or squatters hiding from the draft. What they discovered instead made hardened men weep and vomit in the mud. The approach to the hollow was a trail no wider than a mule's spine, hemmed in by limestone spires. The first sign of life they saw was smoke, thin, gray, and sickly sweet. The stench grew stronger the deeper they rode. Then they found the graves, dozens of them. Small mounds marked by stones, most no bigger than a loaf of bread. Some so fresh the dirt still steamed in the morning sun. "Children," one deputy muttered, pulling off his hat. "God help 'em," the sheriff replied. They dismounted at the main cabin, a 2-story structure built from raw oak, its windows boarded and its door hung with a cross made of animal bones. Inside, the air was thick with rot and smoke. Pots of dried herbs hung from the rafters. A Bible lay open on the table, its pages covered in writing so dense it looked like the hand of a madman. And then they found Matilda Shepherd. She sat in a rocking chair before the hearth, her body rigid as wood, eyes open but empty. In her lap lay the family Bible, stained with blood that had dried to black. The deputies thought her dead until she moved, just her lips, whispering over and over, "The blood shall not be broken." When they tried to question her, she only smiled and pointed toward the second cabin deeper in the trees. That's where they found the rest. The Shepherd brothers were long dead, 2 by self-inflicted gunshot, 1 by hanging. Around them lay the remains of women and children, some skeletal, some preserved with salt, others too far gone to recognize as human. It was as if time itself had stopped in that valley and rot had been left to do the work of judgment. One deputy, a war veteran named Cole Brennan, fell to his knees and began praying. Another swore he saw movement among the shadows, small figures slipping behind doorways, eyes glinting in the dark. The sheriff ordered the hollow burned. The fires took 3 days to die, and when they did, all that remained was ash and bone. Matilda was taken into custody, though she never spoke another coherent word. When asked about her sons, she only murmured, "They went to prepare the house." Elizabeth Shepherd, when told what they had found, refused to return to the site. She stayed with the church until the day she vanished in 1921. No one saw her leave. No one saw where she went. Some said she returned to the hollow. Others claimed she walked into the woods one night and never came back. The state closed its file in 1924, labeling the case familial insanity and self-extinction. But the people of Stone County never forgot. For decades after, hunters would find strange carvings on trees near the old trail, circles of 3 crosses, burned into the bark. And sometimes, in the fog before dawn, they swore they heard a woman's voice whispering from the hollow, soft, pleading, and not entirely human. By the time the Second World War ended, Iron Hollow had already passed into local legend. People told stories of the Shepherd curse, of pale figures seen on moonless nights near the old trail, of screams that carried through the fog like echoes from another century. But no one dared to set foot there, at least not until the fall of 1949. That year, the Missouri Department of Forestry sent a young surveyor named Thomas Ridley into the Ozark backcountry. His assignment was simple: map old homestead lands for timber claims. Ridley was 25, a war veteran himself, the kind of man who didn't believe in superstition. He'd heard the stories at the general store in Ava, the ones about the shepherds, the blood church, and the valley that ate its own. He laughed them off. "Ghost tales for drunk farmers," he'd said. On October 12th, Ridley followed an abandoned wagon trail northwest of Stone County, guided by an old map that still marked Shepherd's Crossing. By dusk, he reached a cliff pass where his compass began to falter. The woods grew unnaturally quiet. Even the cicadas went still. What Ridley didn't know was that he'd already crossed into the remains of Iron Hollow. He found the clearing just before nightfall. The cabins were long gone, reduced to blackened foundations swallowed by weeds. But the air still smelled faintly of smoke, as though the fires that had once cleansed the hollow still lingered in the earth. In the center of the clearing, he found a stone slab, flat, smooth, and carved with words that time had almost erased. "The blood shall not be broken." Ridley brushed the moss away and made a note in his journal. He camped nearby, intending to sketch the site by morning. But sleep never came easy. The woods seemed to breathe around him. More than once he thought he heard footsteps pacing just beyond the glow of his fire. Near midnight his horse screamed. Ridley leapt up, rifle in hand, and saw nothing, only shadows shifting between the trees. Then came the whisper. Faint, feminine. "Go back." He turned, lantern raised. The clearing was empty, yet the whisper came again, closer this time. He backed toward his tent, heart pounding. The fire flickered low, and in that weak light he saw something move behind the stone slab, something small, stooped, and pale. He fired once. The sound tore through the valley, then died into silence. When morning came, he found no tracks, no blood, only the bullet lodged in the slab itself. Ridley packed his things and left before noon. When he returned to Ava, he handed in his map, saying nothing about what he'd seen. But he never finished his report. That winter, his supervisor found his journal on the edge of the hollow trail. Inside was a single entry written in shaking hand. "There are still children in the valley. They never grew old." After that, Iron Hollow was sealed off once more. Locals claimed the state declared it restricted land, though no one ever found the paperwork. And the name Shepherd was spoken again, softly and only after dark. The journal of Thomas Ridley might have disappeared forever if not for the flood of 1953. When the White River overflowed, a farmer named Earl Danvers found a tin lockbox tangled in driftwood near his property. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and mold, lay the field journal of the missing surveyor. Most of it was soaked beyond saving, but a few pages remained legible. The first entries were what you'd expect from a government man: coordinates, tree species, soil notes. But as the days progressed, his handwriting changed, sharper, erratic, as though each word clawed its way out of fear. The first clear entry read, October 9th, 1949. I've been told by the men in Ava to steer clear of Iron Hollow. They say the Shepherd family was burned out by the law after doing things too wicked to speak of. Old superstition. But there's something about the air down here. Heavy, close. The birds don't sing much. I'll camp by the ridge tomorrow. Then another, dated October 11th. Found remains of an old structure, foundation stones, and what might have been a well. Heard movement in the trees after sundown. Thought it was a coyote, but it sounded like whispering, almost like a child humming a hymn. The next page was half burned, the ink smeared, but one line survived. They're still here. From there, the journal became a kind of confession. Ridley wrote of hearing voices in his dreams, women singing verses from scripture, children laughing in the dark. He described small footprints near his tent that never led anywhere, and shadows that stood still even when the trees swayed. He also mentioned something else, something he called the Mother. She walks the ridge at night. I thought she was one of the shepherd women at first. Her face, pale as ash, hair white, but her eyes, they shine like lanterns. The forest listens when she moves. The final entry was dated October 13th, the day before Ridley vanished. The Mother came again. She stood by the stone slab, the one carved with the words about the blood. I asked her what she wanted. She said, to keep them safe until the world remembers. When she stepped toward me, I saw the ground move beneath her feet, like the earth itself was alive. Below that, a single line written in a trembling scrawl. If you find this, don't follow the creek. It runs backward. After the flood, the lockbox and its contents were handed to the Stone County Sheriff's Office, but within weeks, both vanished from evidence. Some said the papers were destroyed. Others claimed the state sealed them for reasons of public safety. But the Danvers family, who found the box, swore that the night after they handed it over, their farm animals refused to go near the river, and for years after, Earl's youngest daughter would wake screaming, saying she saw a pale woman standing by the window, humming an old hymn, The Blood Shall Not Be Broken. By the early 1960s, Iron Hollow had become a place of silence on every map. Locals called it the Blighted Valley. Roads that once led there were overgrown, and even the game avoided it. But every few years, someone would wander too close, a hunter, a hiker, a drifter, and not all of them came back. Those who did told of seeing her. They called her the Mother of the Hollow. Descriptions varied, but the essence was the same. A tall, thin woman with white hair and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark, like the reflection of lantern light on water. She was never seen walking, only standing, at the edge of the trees, on the ridge at twilight, or beside the ruined stone where the shepherd altar once stood. Some claimed she whispered verses from the book of Ezekiel. Others said she wept softly, as if mourning the land itself. In 1963, a reporter from the Springfield Ledger, Harold McKinney, decided to investigate. He was a skeptic, writing a feature called Legends of the Ozarks. His plan was to debunk the stories, to show readers that Iron Hollow was just another ghost tale born from hill country fear. He entered the hollow with a camera, a tape recorder, and 2 local guides. Only one man came back. That survivor, a logger named Luther Pike, was found wandering the highway 2 days later, clothes torn, face gray with shock. His statement, taken by the sheriff, was short and broken. She was there, by the old stone. The other 2, they went to her like sleepwalkers. She didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at him. Then the light came from the ground. Like the earth was breathing fire. I ran. I didn't look back. No trace of McKinney or the second guide was ever found. But the sheriff's deputies who later searched the site discovered something strange. McKinney's tape recorder, still inside its leather case, half buried near the altar stone. The tape inside was intact. The recording lasted 17 minutes. For the first 5, only wind and footsteps. Then McKinney's voice. We're at the old foundation. There's a smell of good Lord, something burnt. Luther says he saw movement by the ridge. Static. Then another voice, and a woman's. Faint, distant, and layered. as if spoken through water. "The blood shall not be broken." McKinney gasps, the microphone crackles, and then a sound like wind rushing through a tunnel, but deeper, pulsing. After that, only silence. The recorder stopped at 10:47 p.m. Experts later claimed the tape was damaged by moisture. Locals knew better. They said the mother had spoken, and that anyone who heard her voice became part of the hollow. Another soul folded into the shepherd blood. By 1965, state patrolmen began rerouting travelers away from that part of the Ozarks. Officially, the reason was unstable terrain. Unofficially, they called it a mercy, because by then, the woods around Iron Hollow had begun to change again. The trees grew twisted, their trunks hollowed from within, and sometimes when the wind passed through, it carried a sound too human to be the work of nature, a sound like breathing. The winter of 1972 brought more than snow to Stone County. It brought revival. Across the Ozarks, preachers were stirring old faiths, blending Pentecostal fire with backwoods superstition. Tent revivals bloomed like weeds after rain, and one of the most fervent voices among them was Reverend Silas Crane of Ava, Missouri. Crane was a man of charisma and cruelty in equal measure. Tall, sharp-featured, with eyes that seemed to drink in every soul before him. His sermons promised salvation through purity, through the cleansing of bloodlines he claimed had been poisoned by the world. Most dismissed his words as eccentricity, until he began preaching about the hollow of the shepherds. He claimed God had shown him a vision, a woman standing in the forest, radiant and sorrowful, calling him to restore what was lost. Locals laughed at first, but after the first tent meeting near the ridge, laughter turned to fear, because Silas Crane didn't come alone. He brought 12 followers, men and women who'd sold their homes and given everything to his ministry. They called themselves the Fold of the Living Blood. In October 1973, they moved into the woods north of Iron Hollow, erecting crude cabins and a chapel of rough-hewn timber. Their hymns echoed through the hills at night. Witnesses said they could hear children's voices among them, though none had been seen entering the camp. By the following spring, hikers began to vanish again. 2 university students, a hunter from Mansfield and a state surveyor. When deputies searched the ridge, they found only circles of stones blackened by fire and crude crosses made from animal bones hanging in the trees. Inside one burned-out campfire ring, they discovered a melted cassette tape. When restored, a few seconds of audio survived. A woman's voice, clear, sorrowful, and hauntingly calm, saying, "The blood shall not be broken. You have called me back." Reverend Crane's followers swore that the mother had appeared to them during worship, a figure wrapped in white, with eyes like glass and a voice that could make the trees bow. They believed she was Elizabeth Shepherd, risen from death to guide them toward the renewal. By late 1974, the fold was gone. Their chapel stood empty, food rotting on the tables, Bibles open to the book of Ezekiel. The sheriff's men found 13 bedrolls, but no bodies. All that remained was a spiral of symbols carved into the dirt behind the chapel, 3 interlocked circles surrounding a cross. Inside it, written in ash, were the words, "She is flesh of the valley now." The valley lay quiet for a decade after that, as if holding its breath. But hunters still swore that some nights, when the moon sank behind the ridge, they heard faint singing drifting from the hollow. Not a hymn of praise, a lullaby. And those who heard it too long never came back the same. By 1984, Iron Hollow had become a name whispered only by those who still remembered the old stories. Maps no longer marked its location, and even the U.S. Forest Service avoided patrolling too deep into its folds. Locals in Somerset County treated the place like a wound, best left untouched, best left to scab over in silence. The few who dared to enter the region often did so for one reason: curiosity. Folklorists from Lexington, amateur ghost hunters, and college students with cassette recorders came chasing the legend of the Shepherd bloodline and the Fold of the Living Blood. Most left disappointed, finding only decaying timbers, animal bones, and moss-covered stone chimneys. But some found more than they expected. In April of that year, A graduate student named Catherine Morell from the University of Kentucky submitted a proposal to the state archives. Her project, Echoes of Isolation, Appalachian Family Myth and Moral Collapse, included plans to document first-hand oral histories around the old Iron Hollow region. She arrived that June, driving a battered Jeep and carrying a tape recorder, notebooks, and a Winchester rifle she claimed was for bears. Locals warned her not to go beyond Rocky Gap, where the limestone cliffs narrowed into the forgotten entrance of the hollow. "Ain't nothing there but ghosts and rot," said one old man at the general store. She smiled, thanked him, and went anyway. For 3 days she camped near the ruins of the Shepherd homestead. Her journal entries from those days, later recovered by forest rangers, read like fragments of a descent. June 9th, found remnants of the old stone foundation. Smells like sulfur near the spring. Heard singing last night, distant, maybe the wind through the hollows. June 10th, the soil feels wrong, uneven, buried something here once, many times. The trees lean inward, like they're listening. June 11th, I followed the stream. There's a place where the water runs red with clay, but it tastes metallic. Saw shapes in the fog. Children? No, can't be. On the morning of June 12th, Catherine radioed her department supervisor one final time, reporting that she was going deeper into the ridge for final samples. After that, the line went silent. A search team found her camp 6 days later. The tent was slashed open from the inside, supplies scattered, the tape recorder lying in the mud beside the stream. The last tape inside contained 37 minutes of audio, most of it static, wind, and the distant trickle of water. But in the final 60 seconds, a faint voice emerged. A woman's, barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have come back." Then, a child's laughter. Catherine's body was never recovered. Her Jeep remained parked near the old Forest Service road, keys still in the ignition. A single word scratched into the dust on her rear window. Pure. After that, the state closed the entire area around Iron Hollow, citing hazardous sinkholes and unstable terrain. Locals knew better. They said the hollow wasn't dangerous because of what was buried there. It was dangerous because something still woke beneath it. And sometimes, when fog rolls low across the Cumberland Plateau, travelers claim to see 3 figures standing motionless in the mist, tall, bearded, identical, guarding the valley like watchful shadows. By 1996, Iron Hollow had faded from public memory, a myth buried beneath layers of rumor, folklore, and state denial. But in the mountains, memories linger longer than maps, especially dark ones. That year, a new kind of curiosity took hold in the Ozarks, the internet. Message boards and chat rooms buzzed with amateur sleuths trading ghost stories, missing persons reports, and so-called forbidden coordinates. One name surfaced again and again among the threads: Iron Hollow, sometimes called Shepherd's Pit, sometimes simply the Valley of Blood. One of those names belonged to Ethan Cole, a 27-year-old journalist from Lexington with a fascination for unsolved Appalachian crimes. His online handle, Nightridge93, became infamous in early forums devoted to backwoods mysteries. When he stumbled on a grainy photo of 3 identical men standing near what appeared to be an abandoned cabin, he knew he had found his next story. The image came with no date. No source, only a caption. Taken near Iron Hollow. They're still guarding her. In October of 1996, Ethan packed his camera, tape recorder, and a lantern and drove west toward the Cumberland Plateau. He stayed the night in Somerset, where the innkeeper, an elderly woman named Mrs. Pritchard, recognized the name immediately. Her grandfather, she said, had once been a hunter who found a starving girl in those woods, the one they called Elizabeth Shepherd. When Ethan pressed her for details, she refused to speak another word, but left a folded note under his door before dawn. It contained only 3 lines. Follow the stream that never freezes. The stones still remember. Don't go after dark. By noon, he had reached the forest road that ended just shy of Iron Hollow. He hiked the last 2 miles alone, following the cold stream that wound between the ridges. Just as the note had said, the water flowed even through frost, cold enough to burn his skin. At dusk, he reached a clearing, the same one Sheriff Blackwood had written about in his old deposition, now overgrown and silent. Only the stone foundations of the 2 cabins remained. He set up his tripod, began recording, and spoke into the microphone. October 21st, 1996. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm standing in the ruins of Iron Hollow, site of the Shepherd murders, the fold of the living blood, and countless local disappearances. I don't expect to find ghosts, only truth. That was the last confirmed record of Ethan Cole. 3 weeks later, his Jeep was found abandoned near the ridge. Inside, his equipment was intact: camera, film, tape recorder. But the last tape contained something no one could explain. At first, it's just wind. Low, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Then faint footsteps, followed by Ethan's voice whispering, "There's someone else here." "I see. Children?" Static crackles. Then a woman's voice, soft, deliberate. "You came to record the living, but only the blood remembers." A scream cuts through. And then, silence. The film inside his camera showed 6 blurry photographs, the last one of 3 tall silhouettes standing at the tree line, identical in stance, each holding something long and curved, like scythes or staffs. After his disappearance, online communities exploded with speculation. Some claimed he'd faked his death for fame. Others believed he'd stumbled onto a cult revival. But those who listened to the tape said the voice wasn't human, that beneath it, you could hear something older, a whisper layered in static saying, "The line remains pure." That winter, locals began finding small wooden crosses along the creek banks, carved from laurel branches and bound with animal sinew. The state closed access again in '97. But the legend of Iron Hollow had awakened, and this time it wasn't fading. By the turn of the millennium, Iron Hollow had become a forbidden curiosity again. The internet was flooded with digitized newspaper clippings, police reports, and lost tape transcriptions, all orbiting one dark gravity, the Shepherd bloodline. Urban explorers, emboldened by online fame, began venturing into the abandoned stretches of the Cumberland Plateau. Some filmed themselves in crumbling mine shafts, others in empty farmhouses overtaken by kudzu. But only one crew ever made it into Iron Hollow itself, and none of them came back the same. They called themselves the Wraith Channel, a group of 4 friends who filmed paranormal documentaries for early YouTube audiences. Their 2004 upload titled "The Blood Beneath Iron Hollow" is now infamous. It was deleted within 72 hours, but not before it was copied, mirrored, and passed around forums under names like Shepherd 13th Move and Red Stream Footage. The video begins innocently, shaky handheld shots of dense woods, laughter, someone joking about banjo music. The timestamp reads October 19th, 2004. They set up camp beside a cold creek and begin exploring old stone ruins they call the altar site. 21 minutes in, the tone shifts. The camera pans toward a strange clearing lined with crude wooden crosses and animal bones arranged in a spiral. One of them, a man named Riley Horn, mutters, "This is staged, right?" Then they find it, an old wooden door embedded into the earth, covered in moss and nails hammered in crooked circles. The crew debates opening it. They laugh nervously, toss a few jokes, and then the cameraman says, "For the views?" When they pry the door open, the sound is wrong. Not the squeal of wood, something like breath being released. The camera cuts out briefly, then returns to show a narrow tunnel descending into blackness. Riley goes first. They follow with flashlights. For 4 minutes, the footage is pure darkness, lit only by trembling beams of light and the sound of dripping water. Then faintly, a child's giggle echoes from below. Someone whispers, "Did you hear that?" At minute 28, the frame jerks violently. A scream. The camera drops, lands sideways, showing boots scuffling across stone. There's a woman's voice, soft and calm, saying, "You don't belong here, but the blood called you." Then static. The last visible frame before the feed cuts shows 3 figures at the end of the tunnel, tall, unmoving, faces obscured by shadow. When the Kentucky State Police investigated a month later, they found the campsite, tents slashed open, food untouched, personal IDs still there, no bodies. The door, the tunnel, even the clearing were gone, as though the earth had folded over itself. Only the creek remained, flowing red with clay. Locals said the hollow took them back, that those who seek its story are marked by the same calling that drove the shepherds mad. They spoke of a covenant renewed every generation, a promise whispered in the bloodline. Purity demands remembrance. Remembrance demands return. In the years that followed, anyone who viewed the video claimed to hear something behind the static, faint hymns recorded backwards, and a phrase repeated 13 times. The fold is open. The Wraith channel was never heard from again, but sometimes when the signal fades during a storm, radio operators across Kentucky report hearing faint breathing through dead air, followed by the sound of a stream, and a whisper that chills even the skeptics. The living remember. By 2012, Iron Hollow had become more myth than memory. But myths have a way of bleeding back into the present. That year, the Kentucky Historical Review published a short piece titled Appalachian Lineages, A Forgotten Cult of Purity, written by a genealogist named Dr. Marion LeClaire. The article traced the descendants of the original Shepherd family, the ones who vanished in the 1880s, through scattered census data, marriage records, and a handful of birth certificates that survived fires and floods. Her findings were supposed to be academic. Instead, they reopened something far older than paper. According to her research, one line of the Shepherd bloodline had not ended in Iron Hollow. It had moved. A woman named Abigail Shepherd, the youngest surviving niece of the original founders, had been quietly adopted by a Methodist family in Pike County after the 1886 disappearance. Her name was changed to Abigail Sloan. She married, had children, and her descendants dispersed across eastern Kentucky and Tennessee. Dr. LeClaire's conclusion was simple. The Shepherd bloodline remains active, though most bear no knowledge of its origins. Within 2 months of publication, her university office burned down in what was ruled an electrical fire. 3 days later, she vanished from her home in Danville. On her dining table, investigators found her notes and a single Polaroid photograph of an unmarked gravestone. The inscription read only, "Pure." That was the same week Evelyn Sloan, a 28-year-old nurse living in Knoxville, began receiving anonymous envelopes at her apartment. No return address. Inside each was an old photograph, faded, water-damaged, showing the same clearing in the woods. In every picture, 3 figures stood behind her ancestors, expressionless, identical. At first she thought it was a cruel prank, but on the 3rd envelope, there was something different. A handwritten note, scrawled in trembling ink. "You are the last. The fold is waiting." Evelyn had never heard of Iron Hollow, but when she looked up the name online, the results unsettled her. Hundreds of posts, conspiracy forums, half-lost articles, and the cursed footage of the Wraith channel. One clip showed a rusted lantern lying beside a creek, engraved with initials that matched her great-grandfather's. Her dreams changed soon after. She wrote in her journal that she'd wake in the night hearing whispers through the walls and words she didn't understand but felt inside her bones. She saw children in her peripheral vision, faces blank, hands clasped as if in prayer. Once she woke to find mud on her sheets and water dripping from her ceiling, though no pipe had burst. By late autumn, she began to feel watched. Co-workers said she seemed distracted, paranoid. She took leave from the hospital and drove east, toward the Cumberland Plateau. The last known footage of her surfaced from a gas station security camera in Monticello. She bought a map, matches, and a lantern. Her car was later found parked at the edge of a decommissioned forest road near what was once Iron Hollow. The passenger seat held her notebook. The final entry read, "They've been calling me by name. I see them when I close my eyes. I think I know where I belong now." No trace of Evelyn was ever found. But months later, hikers reported seeing fresh footprints near the old ruins. Small, bare, and accompanied by 3 larger ones, side by side, leading deeper into the hollow. By 2018, Iron Hollow had turned into a kind of digital legend, the subject of late-night podcasts, true crime documentaries, and Reddit threads titled "The Blood That Wouldn't Die." Every few years, a new theory emerged: mass hysteria, contaminated groundwater, inbreeding psychosis, or government cover-up. But one thing never changed. People kept vanishing near the same coordinates. That autumn, a small production team from a streaming network decided to capitalize on the myth. They planned a limited docuseries called Hollow Earth, The Shepherd Curse. The pitch promised scientific investigation, regional folklore, and psychological deconstruction of Appalachian hysteria. They arrived in late October with high-definition cameras, drones, motion sensors, and satellite uplinks. The crew consisted of 7 people, 2 producers, 3 techs, a host named Reed McKinney, and a local consultant, an old folklorist named Henry Callum, who'd spent his life studying mountain cults. On the first day, Henry refused to set foot past the creek. "You're trespassing on soil that remembers," he said. "The earth don't forget who fed it." Reed laughed it off, promising him a producer credit and a night at a warm motel. But Henry only looked toward the tree line and muttered, "They always come back when it's cold." The footage that survived shows their descent into Iron Hollow. The air looks thicker there, a haze clinging to the trees even in daylight. Birds go silent around the 5-minute mark. At first, everything is calm, almost anticlimactic. They document stone remains, the dried bed of a spring, and the foundation of what might have been a cellar. Then, as night falls, the tone shifts. Static interference begins affecting every device. The drones lose signal. Microphones record low-breathing sounds, and the compass needles spin uncontrollably. The footage shows one of the techs, Marla, muttering, "It's like the air hums here." Around 1 a.m., a motion detector near the creek triggers. The thermal camera captures 3 heat signatures, tall, identical, motionless. When Reed moves closer with the flashlight, they vanish. Henry Callum, who had stayed at the tree line, begins shouting into the darkness, "Don't follow! That's not for you!" The next morning, only 2 of the crew made it out of the hollow. They were found wandering the ridge road barefoot, clothes soaked in mud, unable to explain what had happened. The recovered footage, released unofficially a year later, ends with Reed standing in the ruins, his face pale, whispering directly into the camera. "It's not a story. It's a memory that keeps replaying itself." And we stepped into its loop, then the lens pans upward. Behind him, 3 silhouettes stand at the edge of the woods. One lifts its hand slowly and the screen cuts to black. Following the incident, the company halted production. Insurance documents refer to the location only as Site 13. No official explanation was given. But that winter, hikers again reported strange lights hovering over the plateau. Locals said the hollow was breathing. That mist rose from the ground like exhalation, pulsing with the rhythm of something asleep beneath. In a radio interview years later, one of the surviving techs summed it up with trembling voice. "We didn't find ghosts. We found a place that remembers us before we're born." By 2024, Iron Hollow no longer appeared on official maps. The Forest Service had sealed off the access road, citing ecological instability, but those who lived in the nearby counties knew the real reason. The hollow had begun to stir again. Strange reports trickled out, low fogs that lingered for weeks, dead animals found in circles of stone, and voices recorded on baby monitors miles from the nearest cabin. Locals avoided the area entirely. Truckers on Route 92 said their radios cut to static near mile marker 17, sometimes interrupted by faint hymns, old, Appalachian-sounding, sung backwards. That summer, an anonymous file was uploaded to a forgotten server used by folklorists and archivists. The folder was simply labeled Shepherd Return. Inside were dozens of digitized photos, transcripts, and one video clip dated May 12, 2024. It showed a woman walking barefoot along a stream, her hair tangled, her clothes drenched in mud. She looked young, maybe 30, but her eyes were hollow, expression distant. She turns to the camera at one point and says softly, "You've been telling our story wrong." Then she lifts her hand, revealing a small wooden cross bound in sinew, carved with the word pure. The video ends there. Analysts who examined the clip couldn't trace its origin, but one frame, when enhanced, revealed something behind her. 3 tall figures standing among the trees, blurred by fog, identical in posture. When investigators cross-referenced the woman's face, facial recognition matched her with a missing person from 2012, Evelyn Sloan. The discovery sent shockwaves through fringe research circles. Some called it an elaborate hoax. Others claimed it proved the bloodline never died, that the fold had reawakened, as it always promised to do. 2 months later, Locals in Monticello began reporting a strange phenomenon, a red mist rising from the creek at dawn, visible only for a few minutes before dispersing. Birds avoided the area, tree bark darkened overnight, and one hunter swore he saw a figure kneeling in the stream, washing something that looked like a child's hand. When a journalist named Aidan Voss tried to document it, he disappeared. His car was later found idling beside the same decommissioned forest road. The dashcam was still recording. The footage ends with him stepping into the fog, saying, "I think I hear singing." Authorities searched for weeks. They found only his notebook, its final line written in blood. The hollow doesn't take people. It keeps them until they remember. Since then, no one has officially entered Iron Hollow. Drones lose signal, compasses fail, even GPS satellites show static haze over the coordinates. Yet hikers still claim to hear movement when the fog thickens, the sound of children's laughter and boots on wet earth. Old-timers say the fold was never a cult or a curse. It was a covenant, a pact between soil and blood, made to preserve something older than faith, deeper than bone. And when the moon hangs low over the Cumberland Plateau, if you listen close, you might hear the hymn carried on the wind, a song that has never truly stopped. The blood is pure. The fold endures. The hollow remembers.